Hey guys, it's Kevin again, and this is going to be my review for Homeland Season 4, Episode 3, Shwlwar Kameez, I think that's how you pronounce it. Either way, this episode was wow. This episode was amazing. I loved it, and this show is just getting so interesting. I mean, like, really, it's really interesting this season. I think this episode was actually better than the first two episodes, in my opinion. I think this episode was definitely better. I really enjoyed this episode. Thought it was definitely fantastic. I loved everything that was going on in it. And there's so many interesting things going on in Homeland right now that I definitely want to talk about. And I thought this episode was just really, really interesting, in my opinion. And there's one thing I definitely want to say here now. A lot of people have been calling Carrie a villain after this episode. And I'm going to talk about that, but I'm going to talk about why. But let's just get to this episode. So we start off where we're in Pakistan, Islamabad, and Carrie is telling her driver that she needs to make a stop at the way to the embassy. And she tells him it's not a request. When they try to refuse, she asks them to pull over, and she asks them why Sandy was right there without protection, which is a valid, question. If he had protection, he could have, they could have prevented his death, but why didn't he die? So, she asks, wasn't it your job? And they tell her that he wasn't easy to work for, and they never let them drive him, he didn't want them to. So she puts on her headscarf and asks them to unlock the door. She says she won't go farther than the corner, and gets out to look around. So we see footage of when she's thinking back to when Quinn, and Sandy were attacked, and Sandy's dragged out to his death, and she looks around and is startled when a car honks at her to get out of the street, and she gets back in her car and says, let's go. So at CIA headquarters in Langley, Quinn is waiting on the therapist to come in, and I thought the scene was very well done. She basically says last year she remembers he was looking to leave the agency, and he says last year was about shooting the kid, and he says now he just wants out. He just wants out, basically. So she says they have to make sure he's not a danger to himself or others. It reminds him of the dinner brawl and the damage he did. He landed himself in jail, so I understand why she's, saying this, because he landed himself in jail and he really did not deserve it. The only reason he was in jail was because of the fact that he was defending that girl that was just a little bit on the heavy side. I honestly don't want to say that she's fat, because I don't think it's like, I mean, I'm not trying to be rude to her, but, like, I'm just saying. So she asks about his nightmares about his first kill, and he says he just snapped he says they have to talk about what happened in Islamabad, and she asks about the two men he killed that tried to take Sandy, and he says he thinks only about Carrie and Sandy. She reminds him that Carrie was one of the reasons he wanted out of Dar's group, and he says the agency worries that one day he'll talk, and he says he knows he can. So she asks about Carrie, and why he chose her over Sandy. And we know that he likes Carrie. We know this. I really like this episode. Really tried to make us root for Quinn and Carrie, because here's the thing. We know that at the end of last year's episode, he kind of the finale last year, he kind of revealed he had feelings for Carrie. And the thing is, Carrie and Quinn are more likely to happen. Carrie and Brody, I think the reason people did not like them was because Brody was married, he was a terrorist, like, neither of them were doing the right thing. So, with Quinn, he has more of a chance. So, she says the agency worries that one day he'll talk. He says he knows he can. She asks about Carrie, and he says he doesn't see what this has to do with anything. Every time someone brings up him and Carrie, he just, like, shuts it down. And I'm thinking, like, he doesn't want to admit he likes her because he doesn't think it's going to work between them. Because Carrie really just thinks of him as, like, a best friend, if you think about it. So, Dar watches this all on the monitor, and Quinn walks out. So Carrie arrives at the embassy and heads inside. Her guards and driver follow, and she sees the car that they were in when Sandy was taken, parked in a quarantined area. And she goes in and goes through security, and the guard checks her bag and hands it back, and he thanks her. And she badgers herself into her officers and looks around. She hears men talking and asks where everyone is, and they ask what she means. And she says they have a full staff meeting for 9:30, and they tell her it should be easy to get them together since they are on lockdown. And she asks where Redmond is, and they tell her he's in with the ambassador. And Boyd Redmond says he canceled their staff meeting, and she requested, since there wasn't much to catch up on, she says to do it her way and get them together. She just, like, literally do it my way and get them together. And Boyd tells her that Redmond is feeling blindsided and says they were all surprised she got Sandy's job. So Boyd says that U.S.-Pakistan relations are at their lowest point, and Carrie asks how the lockdown is helping, and Carrie says she needs to be able to put her guys back on the streets. But Boyd says that's not going to be easy. So Carrie asks her staff to tell her about Jordan Harris, and no one says anything, which I thought was kind of interesting. So she reminds them that they worked with him for 18 months and asks if they share suspicions about Sandy sharing intelligence with the other side. So Redmond says that Sandy's intel was consistently good and says maybe, and she says maybe it was too good. Because, Sandy came across as a very shady guy. So she asks how he could get precise coordinates on high-value targets. And she says no one wants to admit he could have been spying under their noses. So Redmond stands and says, "Young lady, let's have a chat." And she tells him to sit down. And he goes to pour coffee. And she says she wanted to believe Sandy, and based on what Jordan told her, they had to retrace Sandy's steps and find out if he was trading secrets. But Hangsley tells her this won't be easy with the lockdown, and she says she hopes to have it lifted by tomorrow. And she tells John now they can have a chat, and she takes him into her office, and she tells him his directive is to be useful to her. And he says that it's no license to come, and takes a dump on his station. She says it's his station, she can't boot him with a word. He says he was told by, Lockhart, and that he was the one to run for it, and then she got the appointment. So she asks if he really wants to know how she got it, and tells him she asked nicely. So she tells John to clean himself up, and she says she can smell the booze on him from here. He leaves, and then Quinn ignores a call from her. He just, ignores a call. We don't know who it's from, though. And we see that girl, I can't remember her name now. What's her name? Eden. We see that girl Eden that he's basically been with. And you can kind of see that I was kind of wondering, does Quinn really want to be with her? We know that she wants to pursue a relationship, cares about him. So I didn't really know how he was going to handle this. But he says a lot of things happened. And she says he seems very worried. And he says his job doesn't like quitters. And basically, she says he'll need them for a reference, but he says he'll be happy if they don't kill him. And basically, she asks if he has markable skills, and he says he doesn't know, and she asks if he has a degree, and he says no to that too. And she says she's shocked and that he seems so sophisticated. And the phone rings again, and he asks if he's going to get it, and he throws it into the pool. Now, I personally was thinking he was ignoring calls from Carrie, because he doesn't really want to answer from Carrie right now, because I still feel he has feelings for Carrie, but he's hiding it. And he's kind of, ashamed of it. So, Carrie then heads to her apartment in the embassy and looks around. There's little in the fridge, and she wonders if it was Sandy's place, and she gets a text that simply says, "landed." That's all it says, just says "landed." So she tucks a gun into her slacks and says she has to run to a hotel, and the driving security guys tell her they're on lockdown. She says limited pouch runs to clear hotels are okay. So they relent and take her, and a motorcycle pulls up behind them. They tell her it's ISI that wait outside all the time for the car to leave, and she says to dump her at the Sarita and drive on. And she says she won't be more than 10 minutes away, and says she'll be an hour. So she heads inside, and they watch the ISI tail as she goes in. And sorry guys, I was clearing my throat. She walks out another door and hops into a cab, and someone sees her and radios it in. So the guy hops on a motorcycle to the cab, and basically to follow Carrie, and they get away from him at a crowded crosswalk. And then Carrie holds out money to draw a crowd of beggar children. So the motorcycle tail tries to see what's going on, and she uses a diversion, and it's a really intense scene here. I wasn't sure what's going on here exactly. So she uses a diversion to slip into an alley, and he drives on, still after the cab, and she walks through a market and then crosses the street. She goes into a building and up some stairs, and she knocks on a door. And we see the return of Farah. Farah is, of course, the spy working, a spy that's pretending to be from Pakistan, and she greets Carrie, who asks how their flight was, and she says she can tell she's working on her accent. And Max is there, and she asks about Parvez and Kadir, and Max says they're working on the van, and she asks about the kid, and he says, I'm still not 100% sure how you pronounce his name, and I think that's how it is. He's back in class trying to act normal, and Farah says they're going to approach him in his advisor's office at school, and she says it's perfect, and she says she's nervous, like she always is at the start of an operation. So basically, Farah is posing as a journalist. That's what she wants her to do. So, she's spying for Carrie, and Carrie advises her to make light physical contact with him, and says all she has to do is get him to agree to another meeting. So Farah leaves, and Carrie asks Max if Farah will be good, and she says she has to watch out for ISI since they have no official cover. So Quinn then finds Dar pounding on his door, lets him in, but refuses Dar's guard, and he reminds Dar that he told him to fuck off, and Dar says he's concerned about him. He's very concerned about him. So Dar looks at the empty bottles and cans, and Quinn says he doesn't belong to them anymore. And Dar then reminds him that he invested a lot of time and money in Quinn. And Dar says he wants a scalp hunter. Always a scalp hunter. And I thought that was a good quote. And Dar says the morons in the diner didn't deserve what he did to them. And Dar says Quinn needs to convince him he can keep his shit together or he'll have to go through retraining. And he says the issue is his feeling. And I really like that he brought this up because finally, again, I predicted this, that the reason Quinn was being so distant because he has feelings for Carrie. And I really like this. Dar says the issue is his feelings for Carrie and says if she wasn't in the car, Sandy would be alive. Because he said and this is true, I kind of agree with what he's saying here. He says he let Sandy get beaten to death to save Carrie. I agree with this because the only reason that he did not, because Carrie, if you remember, wanted to do some more, wanted to beat these people. However, if they tried that, they would probably die too. So Quinn then literally chokes Dar, lets him go abruptly, and he struggles for breath, and then lets him, well done. And he says he knows he wasn't that far gone, but Quinn tells him to get the fuck out, and Dar tells him to have a nice life. So again, Quinn just doesn't want to admit that he has feelings for Carrie, and I don't really know why. I don't know if it's because he thinks that she doesn't like him, which I don't think she does. I still feel she just thinks of him as a friend. But I personally don't know. So then Eden asks if he's alright, and she's wrapped in a sheet. And she asks who that was, and Quinn says it was no one. And Carrie's jogging, and she's listening to jazz music, doing laps on NBC Pro, and he says it was no one. And then we see Carrie jogging, and she's listening to jazz music. Oh, speaking of jazz music, the new intro. I gotta applaud the new intro. The new intro is amazing. I was a fan of the old intro, but the new intro is so much better. I love that they changed the intro. I thought they were going to because they restarted the entire show, but I wasn't sure, and I'm really happy they did. So, she's listening to jazz, doing laps on embassy property, and she sees some guys bringing in bags and glances at them as she walks in. And she finds Saul laughing with Boyd, and she greets him and asks what's going on. And he asks if she saw her new security team, and she says she didn't expect him to hand-deliver them, and Boyd leaves them to talk. And Saul tells Carrie she's lucky and says Boyd is one of the good ones, and she asks why he's there, and he says he's only there for a few days, weeks tops, and she says it looks like she called him for help, and he offers help, but she says she doesn't need it, and then relents and says yes, and she says he can do one thing and then go home. And she asks him to have the lockdown lifted and with the ambassador so she can put her case officers to work, and he says done. So that's basically what happens there. So then we see Farah do her spying thing here. So Farah waits on Ian and her team sits in a van listening, and his advisor introduces her as a journalist from London. She still is using that British accent, and leaves him to talk. And she thanks him for meeting her, and he says his advisor insisted they meet, and he's ready to walk out. And he says even if she is who she says she is, he can't talk to her. He just can't. And probably because he just doesn't want to think of the event, and he's too upset. She asks if he's in trouble, and she asks him to stay, and she touches him, in a sexual way. And she says they don't have to do this now. Now, this kind of reminds me of the Americans, sort of, because if you remember the Americans, they sexually do things to get information out of them. Farah's kind of doing the same thing to Ian, and it looks like in the next episode, Carrie's going to do this to Ian. So she says they can meet later, but he begs her to leave him alone. He walks out, and she's very disappointed in herself because it did not work out. So she's disappointed because, again, it didn't work out. So Quinn drinks, watches the YouTube video of Sandy's death, and he recalls him yelling to Carrie about the gun being under the scene and her saying it wasn't there. And he sees Carrie trying to get out to go after Sandy and him holding her back, and he starts freaking out and panting. Probably because he's realizing that Dar was right. I mean, that scene was fantastic because he's like, oh shit, Dar was right. I actually did do this. And I thought that was very well done. I mean, the guy that plays Quinn is an amazing actor, especially in this episode. His plot was so good. I loved his plot in this episode. So basically, Farah then tells Carrie that Ian was terrified, and Carrie says he's more valuable, and his fear means that there is something. And Max asks if they can pull a snatch and grab, but she says since he's the only survivor of a botched kill mission, it's not likely. So she tells him she'll think on it, and Carrie's on the roof when Ambassador Boyd finds her, and she asks why she wasn't at dinner. And she says she got busy, and she says she knows she violated the lockdown order, and Carrie asks who told her, and she asks if it was Redmond, and she says no. So Carrie asks for a fresh start, and Boyd says Saul recommended that, and Carrie says Saul likes her and doesn't like a lot of people, which is true. He doesn't. Him and Carrie, the reason they have such a good bond is because Saul doesn't like a lot of people, but he really does like Carrie. That's why they have such a good bond. So Carrie says Saul, basically Boyd says they almost got married in Beirut a long time ago, and Carrie says Saul never said a word, and Boyd said he's very discreet, and she tells Carrie she's lifting the lockdown but not for Saul, so she can improve the relations, and she makes Carrie promise to deliver daily updates in person, and she agrees. And they have a smoke together to seal it, and they're smoking together, and Quinn wakes to the sound of cans and bottles, and he finds Eden cleaning up his place. And he's not happy she's doing this. He literally says, "What are you doing?" And she asks if he's okay and asks again what he's doing, and he asks her to stop talking. She grabs the trash bag, tosses it down, and asks if she did something wrong. He tells her she should just leave now, and she says okay, and she says she needs to get her stuff and go to the bedroom. Quinn sighs, and she says she has one thing to say before she goes. So she says she knows, and I like that she says this. She says she knows this has to do with the CIA guy on the news. He says she doesn't know what she saw. And he says she should be scared because these people don't fuck around. And she says nobody should have to go through what he went through. And says that guy shows up again, she'd say it to his face. So he says he'd really like to see that. And she says she left roast chicken in the fridge and eggs and cereal with liquid dye. And she says whoever Carrie is, she's a lucky girl. And I thought that was very well done because here's the thing. Again, Peter does not really like Eden, but he likes Carrie, but Carrie doesn't like him. So you got a lot of unrequited love going on right now, which I personally really like. I really do, because Brody and Carrie, they liked each other. There wasn't much else to it. They were kind of like star-crossed lovers. I personally wasn't a fan of that. I really wasn't. I mean, they were the heart of the show, and I wasn't really a fan of it. Quinn and Carrie, I can definitely see happening more. So Carrie is then dropped off to her drivers to have breakfast with Saul, and he says he heard the lockdown was lifted and asks what else he can do for her, and she tells him to go home, and she asks about Boyd being his fiance. And he reminds her they haven't talked much lately. She says she's sorry and wanted to pick up the phone, but says she can't talk about what she needs to talk about. And they discuss the tyranny of secrets, and he asks what she's doing today, and she says she can't tell him. But Saul says he can guess. He says he needs to get to Sandy's networks up, but she doesn't know who to trust, so she needs to set up a second station independent of the embassy. And he says he knows she's done that already and says that was quick, and she asks when his plane leaves, and he says tomorrow morning. So she thanks him, and he wishes her happy hunting, and she leaves. So Ian then sits in a cafeteria studying, and a woman comes out calling for a doctor and says a woman is in pain, asking for help, and Ian follows them upstairs to the woman's room, knocks on the door, pushes his way in, and I was very surprised to see this. Carrie's there, and she is pretending to be a doctor, and she tells him he's in trouble, and she says she's Farrah's London bureau chef, but she's not chief, she's not using a accent, though. And he tells her to let him go in. She shushes him, and they listen at the door. She says she thought she heard someone. She tells him he's part of an important story, so she wants him to tell the truth of the story of his family he lost. She asks who he's scared of and says she can help him, even get him out of Pakistan if he wants. And he asks if in exchange for what, and she says just his story. And she says he can continue his studies in the UK or the US, and she says she's putting her card in his pocket. So she touches him as she slides it into his pants, and she says he doesn't have to see ever see him again if he does see her again if he doesn't want to. And she tells him he should want to, though, especially if he's in trouble. And she tells him to tell the others she had female problems and was cramping. And she says she's sorry for what he's been through and wishes him luck. And I thought that was really funny, because I thought that was funny. And then we get the very end of the episode, and I thought this was really an awesome twist. Because Quinn watches the YouTube video again. He pauses it and puts it in slow motion a few times. And he sees something that kind of catches his eye. He sees this bearded guy looking down on the ground. And he watches it several times. And he basically realizes that this guy, that the whole thing was premeditated. Sandy was going to die no matter what. And he tells Carrie this. And basically, he tells her they never had a chance. He says it was premeditated and saw a guy in the crowd with an earpiece orchestrating it. He sent her the video link and tells her to watch it. He points out that the guy that's wearing a comm, and I thought this was really an awesome twist, because here's the thing. I thought Sandy's attack just happened because, Sandy was very shady, but nope, this was the plan all along. So, basically, if Carrie or Quinn would have stepped out there, this would not have happened to them, because it was meant to be Sandy. So she curses and he says they never had a chance. His face turns to the camera, but neither recognizes him. They wonder if he's Pakistani intelligence. She says, why would they do it? And she says Sandy's cover was blown, so he'd have to leave anyway. So why kill him? And she says this changes everything. She says she needs him, but he says he can. She says there's no one there she can count on. And he says not to make her beg. And he says no. And so she does beg. And he says she's the hardest person in the world to say no to. And she asks if that's a yes. And she tells him she fucking loves him. And he says, yeah, but he knows, he knows. And Quinn sits staring after they ring off. She smiles and goes back to her box dinner, and he doesn't look happy about going back. Now, Carrie has, like, this evil smile on her face at the end. And he just looks, like, very unpleasant. So, they are definitely going to reunite in the next episode. And it's going to be very interesting because I really feel like Quinn likes Carrie, but doesn't feel like he really wants to pursue a relationship with her, but he knows that she doesn't really want to do that right now. I don't feel like Carrie wants to be in a relationship, especially after Brody. Because, honestly, think about it, she has not gone over Brody yet. She is not. We know this. She went to Brody's house. She went, she took Fanny to Brody's house last week, so I really feel that she doesn't, is still grieving over Brody. The other thing, why did they specifically target Sandy? I want to know that. Like, what is there that Sandy is hiding? I really want to know what Sandy's hiding there. Do you feel Carrie's more of a villain? I really feel Carrie's more of a villain now, because here's the thing. People are fearing Carrie. We are kind of sympathizing with Ian. I personally am sympathizing with him. I really feel bad for him. And the thing with Ian's character is, like, his whole country and everything was blown up. It was really sad, and it's all really Carrie's doing that this happened. So, Carrie's kind of not really an anti-hero. She's more of a villain now. I mean, that smile she gave at the end, that was a villainous smile. I don't know if I can really... I mean, I really like her character, and she's such a good character, and that's why she's such a good character, definitely. So, I thought that was definitely very well done. The other thing I'm wondering about is, does Quinn really care about Eden? I don't know if he does. I don't feel he really likes her right now, so I'm wondering what's going to happen there. And it looks like next week Carrie's going to seduce Ian, which is really messed up, but that's going to be interesting to definitely see. But I'm really looking forward to the next episode. And also, why didn't Saul tell Carrie about this girl he was engaged to? Why didn't he tell her about that? I want to know that definitely what's going on there. This episode was amazing. I loved it. Thought it was probably the best episode of the season, definitely. Even though we're 3 episodes in the season, and I'm so hooked. I already know this is going to be the best season of Homeland. I like this season 10 times more than last season. This season's so much better. That's my review. Hope you guys enjoyed. I'll see you guys in my next review, which will be my review for Bork Empire. So I'll see you guys for that. And let me know if you guys think Carrie's a villain. Let me know about the unrequited love thing. I'll see you guys in my next review. Okay, bye.